Today we are speaking with Jill Albers. Albers is an account executive at Interface, a global leader in modular flooring. Checks out. Offering an integrated collection of carpet tiles and resilient flooring. Resilient? Yep. Albers graduated from Marymount University, University in Arlington, Virginia. I spent a little bit of time in Virginia during my life with a BA in interior design and immediately began working in the Washington metro area's commercial and corporate design segment. Are you familiar with OTJ Architects?
I'm very familiar.
I shoot with them a lot. In 2017, Jill moved to her family's home state of Maine. Nice, home state, good. So she could start working for Interface. In 2019, she was awarded the Ray C. Anderson Sustainability Award, an honor given by the Ray C. Anderson Foundation to a member of the Interface sales team who actively demonstrated their commitment to Interface's Mission Zero and Climate Take-Back mission in their career and personal lives. Ooh, how do they judge that in your personal life too? We'll have to get into that. In 2023, she was asked to join the Global Sustainability Council for Interface, an international group from all facets of the Interface business. She was tasked with inspiring and influencing the company's sustainability path forward locally. She has been a board member of the Maine Interior Design Association, MIDA, and served as president from 2022 through 2024. Our interview today is sponsored by Maine Home Design. Don't miss Albers' Design Theory in the upcoming January-February issue of Maine Home Design. Thank you for coming to the studio today, Jill Albers. That's the first time I've ever made it all the way through without stumbling and fumbling. And wow, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
All right, deep breath. Now we just have questions. Whew, made it through all that. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
It's been a busy morning, and when I have a lot of technical kind of stuff to do, it gets me all wound up. So I'm trying to it's gonna be okay. Everything's fine.
Have your cup of tea.
Have my cup of tea with caffeine so I don't fall asleep, which will probably have the opposite effect. But so first fun question to start out with: how do we make carpet tiles interesting?
Well, you do it with a mission. So the mission for Interface is to reverse climate change.
So how can we reverse climate change with carpet tiles?
So for Interface, that started over 25 years ago. So it's a pretty interesting story.
Cutting edge at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. It was completely petroleum-based back then. So Interface was doing what every other carpet manufacturer in this world was doing. They were complying with the government.
Right.
Weren't really second-guessing
Not polluting
anything.
immediately like poison into the water, but other than that.
Other than that, yeah. And it was all, it was a petroleum-based industry. So in the early 1990s, there were some questions from customers for Interface, and it was specifically, what are you guys doing for the environment? And it was one of these things that...
Not destroying it immediately.
Yeah, but it was, well, we checked the boxes, we're fine, and that wasn't good enough. So finally, they decided, all right, we kind of need to dig into this a little bit more. And at the time, they tasked our founder, Ray Anderson, with, okay, can you lead the charge on this? Can you take our, we want to start a sustainability mission or, green, whatever, and we want you to kick that off. And he was pretty reluctant because he was not.
Yeah, at that point, you're a carpet tile manufacturer, and no one's going to care that you're trying to save the environment 25 years ago. Really.
Yeah. And so through a series of events, he had a book that came to him. Someone gave it to him, and he read it. He was looking for inspiration, something to tell to this group of people, and he actually had what he called his spear in the chest moment. And he realized that he was essentially living the life of a plunderer, and that, one of the quotes was, people like him were going to end up in jail one day. And from that point forward, he wanted to make Interface a restorative company. And so in 1994, they launched they launched Mission Zero, which was their first mission. And it was to eliminate their negative impact on the planet by 2020. That was the goal. And
So it's 2024.
yeah, yeah.
And have they been able to do that?
Yeah, we achieved what we called Mission Zero in 2019. So we actually achieved it early.
Nice.
Ray wasn't around to see that, but his legacy is still pretty alive in the company. And so, yeah, we became a carbon neutral company.
How do you do that as a corporation making things as toxic as carpet?
Yeah, so I mean, it was a bunch of things. So one of the biggest things that happened in that carpet industry back in the day was a change in supply chain. So when Interface looks at their product portfolio, our product portfolio, there's a lot of oil based, right? So it's plastic.
Yeah.
Let's not pretend what it's not. It is plastic, and at the time, everything was virgin. And so what they started doing,
like new plastics just being chemically created,
absolutely,
rather than recycled or whatever
correct,
else. Okay.
Yeah. And so a couple things that they started to do is they started to understand what is all the parts and pieces in our supply chain, like everything that we put together. So Interface is the manufacturer, but we have hundreds of supply chain
Raw materials,
correct.
Essentially.
Yep. And they looked at those individually to say, where is the biggest impact in our product portfolio? And the number one contender was the yarn. So the face of the carpet, right? So
what
the
you
fuzzy,
actually touch when you're...
the fuzzy side. And that's where all the, that's what allows us to get the color, the pattern, the texture, et cetera. And it's everything that's going to be walked on. And so we went to our supply chain and we basically pushed on them and got them to kind of consider what their footprints were. And as a result, ended up, if you fast forward, we're now working with 100% recycled nylon. And so that was really a push from us saying, we need to do better. If we're going to do better, we have to get our partners to do better. And then when our partners do better, we're not their only customer. So that's also going to have a ripple down effect. And so if you look at carpet tile, over the years, you're going to start really a lot of companies, you're going to see all of their footprints having gone down because this yarn, which was one of the major first, items that really started to have an impact in that. And then from there, it was also a trickle down. What else can you do? What else can you create that is a circular economy? What can we do in our manufacturing process?
What do you mean by circular economy?
So can we take back our carpet, right? So can we have a place
buy back your old carpet?
Essentially, yeah, you can think of it that way. So can you have carpet to carpet recycling, right? So at the end of the life, what happens to that product? And this is whether it's carpet or it's anything, clothing, any kind of architectural material. What's going to happen to it when it's done? And so there's a couple questions you want to ask there is how long is it supposed to last in the first place, right? You don't...
It's plastic. It'll last forever.
It will certainly last in the environment forever, potentially, right? So starting to do things like that where you start to understand, can we have a place for this? And first of all, is it going to actually meet or exceed its estimated lifetime? Sometimes... in a commercial environment, we might be worried about cost. In some ways that we're trying to cut cost is maybe using a lesser quality material. Lesser quality materials may be less expensive in the beginning, but ultimately, does it just end up in the landfill sooner than it should have? So that's one part of it. And then, sometimes you just... get to a point where you're ready for a change, right? We want to aesthetically switch up things, trends change, things like that. And so how do you make sure that if it's something that it has, gone to its end, what do you do with it then? So we created what's called re-entry. So that's a carpet to carpet recycling program. So we can actually take back material. And committing to being able to use materials that can be in that continuous loop so that it can keep going back and going into our products.
Right.
So those are all some of the things that we've done. And then we kind of got a little bit further on and we started using sequestered carbon as well. So that's been an exciting thing.
Sequestered carbon, is that where you're purchasing carbon tax, essentially. I'm sure I'm getting a lot of this wrong, but that kind of thing, or in the way I understand it in the building industry is like wood is captured carbon in a sense, or am I getting that wrong?
No, yeah. So wood is considered to hold carbon, right? So plants absorb carbon, and so therefore wood products, has that carbon that it's sequestered. And as long as it hasn't started to decay and stuff, it's not going to be re-released out into the atmosphere. So it's trapped within the plant. So, plants naturally absorb. That's just part of the process we all learned back in, middle school science. So when we talk about captured carbon in the built environment, wood's one example, but you can also, you can be proactive in sequestering that carbon out. So when you think of something that is, let's say it's a plant-based waste, right? So you might have, there's examples of the Mayans using, the waste of plants after crops have been you harvested
So like stalks or
correct.
something.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's not something that you're going to use for food, but it is plant
Could
based.
feed cattle or
Potentially, yeah. But a lot of times,
make clothes or stuff like that.
well, a lot of times what happens is, so let's say you harvested your corn, you have a field of corn. Now you have all the stalk waste left. And so there was a method that they would use. So pyrolysis is a method where they would heat that plant-based waste. You deprive it of oxygen. As a result of that science, you're able to distill it down into the captured carbon. So it looks like charcoal. It's a black substance, and that's a bio-based building material that then you can go and do all kinds of things with. So there's been experiments with, in shoes, there's been experiments in furniture, what can we do to create things using this captured carbon? And essentially by doing that, you're using carbon that wasn't re-released back out into the atmosphere.
Right.
So you kind of have to think of it as, carbon's not a bad thing. It's a building block.
I just wrote this down. Glad you're hitting this.
Yeah.
Because I don't really know why. Like, why is carbon bad?
It's not bad. Yeah, it's a building block of life.
Yeah.
We're all made of carbon.
But
it's
have
everywhere.
we turned it into something that's bad in a sense in dioxide or?
So yes, when we have too much carbon dioxide, so the Earth has, and I'm not a scientist, so don't hold me to all of this.
Play one on TV.
I do play one occasionally. The Earth has its natural ups and downs, right? So that has been part of the cycle and is always the part of the cycle. So you can see, there's graphs, I think, if you look at NASA, where you can actually see throughout the year from winter to summer how, in spring you see the carbon in the atmosphere kind of going away at higher rates because that's when trees are kind of taking it,
Okay, right.
So things
right.
like that. So it's just part of our natural, but the humans, we've put too much carbon in the atmosphere at high rates through that industrial revolution that happened. And so there's been this period of time in our lifetime where we've seen a big spike in the amount of carbon.
Primarily due to something like the Industrial Revolution, I would imagine is a massive, massive contributor to that.
Yeah, and so it gets to a point where is it too much to handle? Can Earth handle it all? Well, maybe not. Maybe we've overwhelmed her and she's, just at capacity. So if we can start to prevent more of that from being off-gassed in the form of carbon dioxide, if we can prevent it from going anywhere, then we're okay with it, right? So as long as it hasn't been emitted back out into the atmosphere, carbon's a good thing. So for instance, if we go back to that field of corn, what the farmers would do is after they've captured that sequestered carbon or captured carbon, they're going to put that back into their soil, right? So they're going to farm with that because you want the carbon in the soil. You want that to help with their crops, and it's going to help them with their plants. But we don't, again, want too much of it in the atmosphere. So it's just, kind of say sometimes it's a real estate problem with carbon. You want it in the right place at the right time.
Right. Are you familiar with the story around unleaded gas and leaded gas in a similar way?
I've heard some of it, right? It was back in like one of the 80s presidents, or was it George Bush? Or
we'll butcher it,
yeah.
but let's have fun with it. Do your own research.
We were kids, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it was more so in the 40s and 50s. Okay. If I'm getting it close to right, initially they used leaded gas so it wouldn't do that pinging, like early ignition or whatever, I think. And something to do with the leaded gas, either let lead into the atmosphere or some other thing that everyone was thinking that we were fine with. And we used leaded gas, I believe, because of that pinging issue or just better on the engines. And someone started to pick up that, oh my goodness, we are tipping some weird scale with the whole Earth by this weird, very, very toxic, very weird thing that's getting into the atmosphere because of what we're doing with this. And it's a similar argument. You know, people argue, well, the Earth goes through warming and cooling cycles, so this whole green push is just a way to manipulate populations towards new business models or whatever. But there's also an argument to say that, well, I mean, look at what we did with this leaded gasoline situation where we started to act in this way, and you could see in the data that we were creating this monster that was going to tip a scale in a very bad way. And it took some people really sounding the alarm bells to start to transfer over to unleaded gasoline that we all use now, which still belches, gross things. You wouldn't want to breathe off the end of a tailpipe, you know. So, so it's a similar analogy or thing to grab on when speaking to people about such things. Like, well, we can make a difference. Look what we did. Now, it might be on a totally different thing that we're introducing something into the atmosphere that never should have been in the atmosphere, and maybe carbon is okay in some ways. I get it. It's a nuanced argument, but humans do make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The precise percentage of what difference we make is the arguing kind of between the poles of the argument, I would imagine. So It's an interesting thing to, YouTube it, and there's a bunch of videos on it, and you'll check it out and see what you think. But we have a series of questions that we haven't even gotten to yet. And you're very well informed on these things. I see why you do that. Okay, why did you leave your interior design career to work at a carpet tile manufacturer? And I would imagine they were pulling on your heartstrings for an environmental thing, because now you can speak at depth on the issue, it seems.
Yeah, so when I was in design school, I was on college campus and went and saw a documentary, The Corporation. So this was back, I want to say it was 2003. So it's a Canadian documentary, and they featured Interface as an example of a large company that was trying to do something. And so it was the first time I ever got exposed to Interface or Ray Anderson, and just immediately he had a huge influence in my future design career. So it was one of those things where, when I was in design school, I didn't actually know anyone that was an interior designer. I didn't know what my actual career was going to look like when I left school. I knew I was fascinated by it. I absolutely just loved space and volume and understanding how things connected and built. But I otherwise was lost and really didn't know what I was going to be doing. And seeing Ray and seeing what his story of how he took Interface and was with the goal of making it a restorative company, it really taught me the power of what an interior designer has the potential to do. So the potential to take our clients and to guide them through choices and help them to make healthy and, sustainable choices for their environments. That there was so much power there. And it really just was one of those things that kind of was the beginning light bulb going off for me. So I left school and I had drank the Kool-Aid I was in. So as a designer, I was a big specifier of interface materials, and always wanted to work for Ray. He was just, again, one of those people that I followed. And unfortunately, I never got to meet him. He passed away in 2011. And that was the same year that I actually got to go to the interface mill as a designer. I got to go there and see, kind of behind the curtains, how it was made. And so I never got to meet him. But again, it was just one of those things that I wasn't going to leave my design career for just anything. But to me, the purpose behind what Interface was doing was so much greater. And the potential to move more than what at the time I felt I could.
A greater purpose,
Yeah.
or a greater influence in a broader sense.
Yeah. So in the, let's see, what time frame was it? Like 2016 or so, my husband and I had, grown up pretty much in Northern Virginia, living in, at the time we were living in Falls Church, right outside, Arlington. And we both worked in the city at various times, and we were just done. We had our second child, and we were spending
Didn't
a
like
lot
the Beltway traffic.
We were in traffic quite a bit. So, on average, about 2 hours a day with our kids were in the car for almost 2 hours a day, and that was a lot.
Yeah.
So we started to say, can we see, where we might be able to take the family and kind of have a better work-life balance.
Right.
So by chance, I went to see what was going on with Interface, and they had an opportunity in Maine. And my parents are born and raised in Aroostook County, so go back on both sides of the family, multiple generations.
Interesting.
Maine was home. It's where every other family member lived.
Right.
And so when we saw that Interface was hiring in Maine, it was a no-brainer. And I submitted my resume the very next day. And I think a week or two later, I was interviewed in the Reagan airport. It was a very unorthodox.
Really, that's one of my favorite airports. Honestly, I do a lot of work for OTJ, so I'm going through the not DWI or what's the call letters?
DCA.
DCA. Yeah, I'm going through DCA all the time. Usually in the beginning of the summer for some reason.
Yeah.
But I really love is Art Deco-ish. What would you call that? From someone who knows much more about interior design.
It's been a while since I've seen it. Yeah, it's a beautiful airport. I mean, it's nice because it's small and it's like compact, so you're not.
But it's
going
creatively
through.
designed.
It is.
It's not like a cookie
the
cutter
original terminal part
picked out of a bin of parts.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's not exactly what I designed, but I really appreciate it.
Dulles is also really beautiful.
Yeah, Dulles is nice, but I don't like the drive. I'm always shooting in downtown DC, and I just don't want to,
No.
And I just love I fly in, I spend the night there in Crystal City.
Oh, yeah.
Shoot back the night. A lot of times we'll fly in the same day, shoot, fly back the same day, and that's really efficient. But yeah, it's always a visual experience going through there. And they just added a wing to it that's okay, but it doesn't have as much charm as that initial. I
fly there in December, so I'll make some mental notes around.
Yeah, get back to me on what actual style that is. It's interesting to me how much the mentorship from a single documentary, in a sense, mentorship of the ideological path that you've taken towards this work with a specific company, with a specific person that was reluctant to even get on this train, who then convinced against their will initially, now flipped over to like, oh yeah, wow. And how that spread both intellectually and emotionally to others, and primarily yourself in this case, and ended up you being at somewhat of the helm of leading this for this company to a degree, or?
I mean, there's an amazing group at Interface. We have, an entire sustainability group at our company that's full time, like that's their job. I am, I think, a sidearm of them. It's just
Don't make us call Jill.
No, it's my passion. It's, it's just it's that driving part of me. So, it was one of those things that, he was a Georgia boy. He, born and raised in that part in near LaGrange, Georgia. And that's where the mill is for us. And, I think he really created Interface from nothing. He took out his own life savings and built this. And so, maybe there's a part of that just is, it feels approachable, right? It feels like if he can do it, if he can have this type of influence on, what is now the world's largest carpet tile manufacturer, then, why can't any of us do that? And, I get frustrated when I hear people say, oh, well, it's just me. I can't, what can we do? Or no, everybody can do we all have
vote
the opportunity.
Every day with your dollars.
Absolutely.
Especially in this capitalist society.
Yeah.
You're voting with your dollars constantly.
And if you are, and then I'm going to go further, that if you are a designer or an architect and you are specifying, your power is so much greater than the average person. And so I think that right there, that's the single thing that Ray Anderson taught me, was that when I specify, I'm more than just, Jill. I have power behind me. And, I was in DC, we were designing spaces, there were projects that one project was 1 million square feet. That's massive.
Yeah.
And so when we start to think about all of the specifications, every single material that goes into a building in a whether it's a 4,000 square foot building or whether it's a 1 million square foot building, that is a lot of power and a lot of decisions. And so the interior designers and the architects of the world, like, that's our superpower, right? And so when when we're faced with these daunting tasks of reversing climate change, I argue that there's no one better poised to do that than this industry because of all of that. So there's a company called ThinkLab. I don't know if you like podcasts, and so that's like a kind of design podcast series. I think Designers Anonymous is the name of it. And so they have some really interesting...
What's it called?
Designers Anonymous.
Okay.
ThinkLab.
ThinkLab, okay.
And so they did kind of this report last year of the design industry. And what they said was they were trying to understand the purchasing power, the buying power of the designers, right? Yeah. And so what they said is the average designer, so we could probably say that's most designers here in Maine, right? We're going to put you in the average category just from the size of the projects we're working on. Your purchasing power is 26 times that of a regular, person who's not specifying.
Right.
And then if you just happen to be in one of those bigger design areas, New York City or anything, and you're working for someone like Gensler, your potential is 111 times more than the average person. Right. So that's a lot. And, when we talk about having to make a lot of changes on a pretty short timeline, that's where it is. If we start to focus in on those materials, then we can really start to say, we'll start to see that needle moving, and it's like those low-hanging fruits, right? So what can we evaluate? What can we do now to make change for tomorrow?
I'm glad you segued that way. What do we do to change people's minds? Because often projects are VE'd, or what do they call it? Not VE'd. Value engineered. Yes, it is VE'd.
Yes, we deal with it. And there's, in fact, I would argue that nowadays we're doing it from day one. It's not even waiting till, after the project started. So I think what we have to
now, before you answer, let me interrupt you. And so the one sentiment is to change the thinking of the culture to value it more.
Yeah.
But that has no legal grab to it. now we certainly in the last decade have changed the conversation enough to where people are very, very aware of the conversation, but there's about 50% of the country that will just, they're trying to manipulate us. And we can't ignore that because they are 50% of it. So the people who are suspicious that like, you're just trying to manipulate us. How do you, because I always wish that when anyone got into a political position, the first thing they do is to turn to their opposition and say, how can we work together? Rather than turning to their own team and saying, how are we going to stay in power? That idea of bringing together, because you're never going to undo your connections to the other parts of your family, that are valuable. They're just very different than you have, and they have a different thought process. And I deal with this a lot in my own family. So how do you change minds and convince people along a line of thinking that would look at the choices and say, if I'm going to value engineer out the great central stairwell that lets all the light in, or I'll go with these toxic, I'll just take out the good carpet tiles and I'll put in the toxic ones, and then we can keep the stairwell and get rid of that. How do you convince someone to say, actually keeping, the good carpet tiles in here by your opinion, the good tiles, good for the nation, good for everything else. But then like, how do you make it a little more personal so they don't as much feel like they're being manipulated or attacked, but how do you make them want it? Like, I don't know how to do that. And
yeah, so I guess a couple things. So one, again, I'm going to stress that it's the architect and designer's responsibility for them to know the information, and then they need to decide what's important to their client, right?
Yep.
And so, if you know that your client is looking for the most durable product and they need it to be at a certain economic budget and so forth, those are the items that, and that they don't care about the environment. Like they, again, they're kind of like, don't put
dollars
me in
and
this,
cents. Yeah.
but performance and, budget and, maybe some aesthetic is in there too. Well, we now have enough information to be able to start to compare all of that between products. And so you don't actually have to necessarily spend more money just to say, get a lower carbon footprint material, right? So, but the thing is, for so long, we've never asked that part of the question. We've only asked, is it durable? Does it come in black, or does it come in red, or does it come in the color I want and the texture I want? And does it come at the price I want? And we never evaluated these standard materials on, well, is this one good, or is this one, how much virgin petroleum was used in this,
right,
or, where did it come from? And now, because we've gotten smarter, because we have all of this information, we know that we have to start asking those questions. And so that information is more readily available. And it's sadly, yes, on the shoulders of the design community to sort through that stuff. But I mean, I would say that's what we're here for, right? I mean, it's kind of, I think, of the part of anyone who's a designer by, trade, that's in their soul somewhere, right? Yeah. You just kind of have to add it into your evaluation process for all of your materials. And there are tools. There's a lot of tools now that can help us do that. And then you have to decide, okay, that conversation I'm having with the client, I can give them everything they need. But I'm going to, maybe you're going to tweak your language, right? Maybe you don't have to emphasize, hey, you're making these selections and these are the best choices for the environment, right? You can just leave it to them to pick which color paint do you want, but the technical specification of the paint, let that be, your little dirty secret that you made the better choice for them, right?
What? You made this environmentally friendly?
Yeah, And then on the other side, you'll have customers that, they're going to get super excited that that's what they want.
It's a huge selling point today.
Correct.
Like there's a lot.
It's not everyone, but it's growing every single day. It's more and more people who
because
are
of the
in asking
cultural
questions.
shift.
Yeah.
There's a huge idea just around the recruitment of talent.
Yep.
That it's enough of a consciousness within culture now to people are starting to realize I don't want to be part of the problem. And there's generally enough proof to see like, yeah, we're really doing some dirty things here. Can we try and be better?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of opportunity, both financially, business-wise, and also just real, genuine opportunity of a more beautiful, sustainable, poison-free place by acting this way. Yeah. And if we can do that while taking slightly less profit in all sectors, it's still a valuable thing to spend that value on, in my opinion. Yeah. I mean, my wife wanted to put like sheep's wool in the walls of the house and use cork as insulation. And these are great ideas, but at some point you also have to have a budget.
Yeah. And so there are going to be places where that is going to be a premium, right?
Yeah.
So yes, when you're looking at some of these alternative natural insulation, yes, there's a cost there and stuff, but it's not all products. And there is definitely kind of that low hanging fruit that we can go for. And we just have to start getting used to adding that into our evaluation process, right?
Yeah.
Asking that question. And so, there's more and more companies that are providing environmental product declarations, and these should start to be standard, right? So when you're going to look for any material, one of the first questions you can say is there an environmental product declaration for this product? And if there's
what does that mean, an environmental declaration?
It's a third-party certified kind of transparent document that it's they're normally like if you're looking for something to put you to sleep at night, there's 17 pages of a lot of science that words.
It's kind of like a UL certification in a sense.
I think, yeah.
But for an environmental.
And at the end of it, there's your global warming potential, your GWP. So it can actually tell you what the carbon footprint, essentially, the embodied carbon footprint of your material is. And then you can say, oh, okay, how does this compare to another material?
Right.
So what I would argue is we should be asking for that information. It's a very simple thing. When you go to any manufacturer, whether it's a residential or a commercial material, ask them if they have that information available for you to review. And if they don't, well, tell them that they should start working on that, right? Make them start to work for your attention, for your specification.
Right.
And eventually, if you keep bypassing them because they keep answering no, well, they're going to catch on and they're going to finally do that, what they need to do to get that information. And it is something that company does have to put some investment into, but it's kind of like the base, right? If you're manufacturing a product, then you should be transparent in what you're manufacturing, what's going into that.
Right.
And so EPDs, environmental product declarations, ask for the information. The more we can talk about this, the more we can ask these questions, the more we'll get, right? So we're going to all benefit from that. Talking is the number one thing we can all do for reversing climate change. It brings up all kinds of conversations and information.
Right.
Yeah.
So it seems like with food, I use this analogy occasionally, our relationship to food has changed over the last century, where we were much closer to where it was grown, who it was grown by, who made it, and how we consumed it. It was just because we didn't have the technology, we were closer to the entire process. As you move into a more technological society, you lose that relationship, and to replace that as you lose that relationship, you gain a lack of trust towards what you're getting because you don't have the relationship. So in place of that trust, you have to have laws, labels, and legal ramifications for anyone who's trying to get around that. And that's a good thing to protect us. Now, as we move into a more technologically advanced information age, it's my feeling that before, if I saw something amazing, I would tell Jill, and because of our relationship, you'd trust me, what I was telling you. But now I get tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of information, and I don't really know much about it other than that's interesting. And so I'm essentially, my mind now is overeating.
Yep.
And I'm overeating really just kind of junk food, you know? And we're getting to a point where we need some kind of informational understanding of the type of information we're consuming. And especially we're going to get to the point where we need some kind of AI labeling, because we're going to be quickly very, very deceived by what AI can do in a visual, informational, video, imagery, all of that, writing, you name it. We're going to need legal ramifications to understand, was this made with AI? What are in the ingredients of this narrative that I'm being fed? All that kind of thing. And then when it comes to products that we now consume, it seems like a similar relationship, like we have with UL certification for insurance safety or whatever. I think that was driven primarily just by, cost benefit for insurance companies. I'm not sure. But in that sense, it seems like we should have a labeling and tracking system to be able to track the environmental impact of a product, but also the human impact of a product, because we're not just capitalizing on the wealth of this Mother Earth that we have. We're not just kind of like continuing to ride on the shoulders of Mother Earth and and not worry about it. It's not just that, but also our fellow man. We're, how in the chain of supply of this entire thing, are we attempting to profit based off of what we take overly aggressively from less well-off countries and everything else? It seems like all of these things, we need to in some way have legal ramification, but also a tracking system so we can make informed choices.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that they have to be this, that, or the other, but the freedom of choice and the freedom of thought of how you want to contribute to this problem or solving this problem would be a way of getting a much more long-term sustainable solution to something like that. Is there anything in the works like that? Or is there a way for someone as common as myself to look at a product and say, well, what is the environmental impact of this thing that I'm buying? And what is the human impact of this thing that I'm buying?
Yeah, so there is kind of a framework in place already. So AIA created the materials pledge or materials framework. And so it's based on a couple lenses. And so the first thing that because you have to look at things holistically. So the reality is there is nothing probably on this planet that is going to be every single thing that's perfect for every single,
expensive that would be too.
It would, that would
get
be
it.
rough. So, when if you kind of look at these as these are, a couple different buckets, and we want to try and get the part in the middle that, they all overlap, and that little overlap is
The
a
Venn
small
diagram
amount. Yeah. If you're
yeah.
thinking about it in a Venn diagram sense, that's the goal. So but you're not going to be perfect, but you want to be, you just kind of want to be evaluate as much as you can. So a couple of the buckets are embodied carbon. So what is that global warming potential for human health, right? So you think about that as how much was emitted during the extraction, so the raw material extraction and manufacturing process of a material. And that is a very transparent number that can come out, it's calculated. There are rules on how to calculate it. If you are using renewable energy in your manufacturing process versus, fossil fuels, like all of that counts towards that footprint. All right. And so that is something that is actually easy for us to quantify because you can come to an actual number for that.
Right.
So that's one part. That's not everything. We're not going to solve all the problems with just looking at carbon. So then another part of it is the human health. of, the green chemistry, if you will. So what are products off-gassing? What happens once you put a product in a space? What then happens? Is that in a couple years going to be toxic? Is it going to create issues? We learned this, right, with things like lead paint and, things with formaldehyde in them and so forth. We learned these lessons, but there's going to be more lessons to learn in the future. Maine had our PFAS law last year, so we're looking at those,
what is that?
The forever chemicals, right? So, what has forever chemicals in it, and we need to know that up front. And so Maine was at the forefront of passing some of that legislation in the state. So we were the first to put that into law. So that's one thing again. The next part is circular economy, right? So that's going back to the idea of, okay, this is all great. We can have all these materials and they can be, there's no VOCs, there's nothing toxic coming from it, and it's a really low embodied carbon footprint. But at the end of its life, it's going to go to the landfill and there's no other choice, right?
Right.
And sometimes that is the reality, but, what are the other options? So circular economy is looking at that and to say, can we get to a point where we can start to reuse things? The more we can reuse things, the lower that embodied carbon footprint becomes, because you're no longer starting with a raw material. So if you think about that, right, recycled content helps to reduce embodied carbon footprints of materials.
Right.
You still got to be careful, because we got to make sure that anything you're recycling is not toxic, right? That we're not getting something that might have been contaminated and so forth. So it's not, again, it's not easy.
Are you aware of Merck that used to be right here?
Yeah.
Like when we first moved here in the summer, you could smell the smell of sweet trash.
Yeah.
And then you'd smell that. And they only had to be tested for their air quality once a year. Mm-hmm. And they knew the day they were going to be tested on. It was just the most corrupt, weird thing. It was so good that finally left. We still have the smokestack because the city can make something like $300,000 a year just off of putting cell towers on it.
Oh, yeah.
So we still have the visual pollution, but hey.
Yeah. And then the other part of this, and this is a newer part, but thankfully it's been added in there, is that social economic kind of part of it. So what about the people that are making these materials? There's Cancer Alley in California, and
where's Cancer Alley?
It's a place where there was a lot of refinery, and there's just areas right outside. There's neighborhoods right next to these large manufacturing and refinery spaces.
Is
and
it like
there's
in
high
that
rates
Maine
of cancer?
Valley of California?
I'm not 100% sure of that, but there's other places like that across the world, right?
I mean, Rumford has that paper mill that I just went to Rumford for the first time this spring, and it is incredibly beautiful.
Yeah.
But then there's this paper mill right in the middle that if you're on the wrong direction of the wind, boy, you don't want to be there. Yeah,
and there's, stories of a lot of health issues that have come from those that live and have lived in Rumford for years.
Yep. Yeah.
And so those are things that we need to make sure that we're not just designing for the person at the end of a project, right? So if you're designing a home, it's not just the residents that matter. It's everyone down that supply chain and the people after. So from the people who are working in those factories to, those that are going to be around for generations afterwards. And so this framework that AIA created, it gives you all of those buckets to look at, and then it helps you understand, because one of the things that we have a lot in this industry is labeling, right? We have a lot of labels, we have a lot of certifications, we have a lot of, you need to be this and you need to get this certification and so forth. And it's quite confusing, and it's a lot, and it's hard for architects and designers to do their job in general. It's, I think, been glamorized a lot in
the main reason I'm an architectural photographer, not because I was just naturally better at it, but It is not easy.
It is not
being an
easy.
architect.
It is incredibly hard. Hollywood's definitely made it seem like it's, this glamorous job. And, when you don't get paid a lot and you work, 70 hours a week, you realize like, oh, this isn't what I totally thought. But yeah, it's also rewarding in a lot of ways. So yeah, that is, that's kind of this framework, and it helps you to understand how to navigate that. And it's just trying to give you tools to do your job and make these decisions and understand at the end, are you making the best possible choice you can? It's not going to be perfect. We're just not there. But we're getting close. And, the more that we start to think about these things, the more questions we ask and so forth, the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah, perfection is stultifying. Is that the right word? There's a degree of understanding that you're never going to achieve perfection.
Yep.
But as long as you're aiming in that direction, that's the major thing. And keep this conversation at the forefront, I think, is just very, very valuable for how much potential pollution and just messing with the system and raping our resources and everything else that we do if we're not put in check by some degree. I mean, it will happen. We know that from our own nature that we will do these things. And it's so very important for us to protect these resources that we have, this earth that we have, and to keep that conversation alive is just such an incredibly valuable thing. Now, what about life-centered design?
Yeah,
What's that mean?
I mean, it's kind of everything we've been talking about to an extent. So designers, for many, many years, we've kind of been doing what has been called human-centered design, right? So it's thinking about the user and trying to improve the user's experience in the environment, right? And that's not a bad thing. We've done excellent things to make sure. So we, now if you think about, requirements in a workplace, for example, of, we now know how much natural light and, access to the, outdoors, or just even the emphasis of the outdoors, right? So even just using kind of biophilic design elements within a building, how much that improves a user's well-being, right? So your employees, give them access to natural light, and they're going to probably perform better. And we know, and they're going to have less sick days and so forth. And
have you
ergonomics.
Been to LL Bean's corporate offices in Freeport?
I haven't been there in person, but I've seen lots of pictures, and yeah,
probably my pictures.
Oh yeah.
Now we shot it last spring or the spring before, and just a huge
Beautiful
central atrium, and then all that light spreads in. But you can also go out in that central atrium, and there's like these tree houses on two opposing sides, and it's really interesting what they did there, and it was really pretty.
Yeah.
It was nice to see.
It's beautiful. Our carpets are in that atrium.
Well,
area.
I was thinking maybe, okay.
And yeah, so so we've been doing those types of design. So life-centered design is kind of building upon that. And so where human-centered design kind of ended at that specific user, life-centered design is going further. And it's saying that we actually need to be considering all life. So it's really just a holistic approach to say, can we not just think about the individual in that, workspace, but what about the choices that we made, and, what about the ecology of the space that we're in? Were there elements outside in, when we're looking at a plot of land, what was a natural, what was a habitat that was there before? These are things that are important, and we're going to be in trouble if we don't start realizing that these are things that we have to consider and broaden our design perspective with.
To me, it's really interesting to think about how, if you focus everything on human-centered design, you're not understanding the shoulders on all the other forms of life that we stand on.
Correct.
And if you take out the deeper you go with the more seemingly insignificant part that you capitalize on and don't worry about, it makes that whole column of life that you're standing on go down one thing and maybe collapse the entire thing.
Absolutely.
Because we have to deal with eradicating too many deer and everything else because we took out all the predators. So you take out a piece of that chain or that pyramid structure, if you want to think of it like that, and it really has ramifications that you didn't quite comprehend before they started disappearing. And it's like, whoa. I always think of I think it's Interstellar, the movie where he has to leave Earth to go and travel in time and figure something. I don't know. It's all sci-fi, but like corn was the only thing they could grow. Because it was so modified and everything else had died and was a huge dust bowl. Earth was a dust bowl, but it was just corn because they had just, refined and eliminated everything else out. It was just an interesting aspect of the movie that I was like, oh, yeah, we could very quickly do that if we're not careful. Yeah. Just kind of capitalize on everything and not really worry about how much you're taking to focus towards one part of this massive organism.
Yep.
And I mean, I hate thinking of it this way, but often you feel like just the mold on the outside of the orange. But at the same time, if you want that mold to stay in balance and you want the orange to stay around long enough, because once the orange goes away, But I don't think of humans as mold for anyone who might want to send a letter to the editor. And what's this guy talking about? Okay, so why is LCD so critical? I'm assuming that's life-centered design. Why is it so critical for designers and architects to embrace? I would think it's primarily life-centered rather than human-centered for that very reason. Every strata of our existence is built on the shoulders of what came before us, depending on your spiritual, religious view, I would think. But regardless, if you either think that a God created it in 6 days, or if we evolved to this point, you either have a spiritual responsibility to not just trounce on other forms of life, or you're going to die unless you take care of this. So, both points of view come to the common understanding of life-centered design as valuable because we're kind of standing on the top of the ladder, and each one of those rungs holds this whole thing together. If those get kicked out. Okay.
Yeah, it's thinking about that supply chain and just...
Yeah, not just a supply chain of, trucks and everything else, but like arthropods in the bottom of the ocean are doing some part of this.
Absolutely.
Right.
Everything matters down to the tiniest organism.
Yeah, it's something like the biomass of our planet is primarily insects, I think.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised.
I could be butchering that, but yeah, the amount of just ants on Earth is... I always love, like, if I'm in the forest, to just take a minute and look really close at just one little piece, and you start to see everything moving in just a square inch. Yeah. You'll just notice and I always love the little red concrete bugs. You ever notice those on concrete?
Yes, the tiny little
They look like
ones.
tiny little red crabs.
Yeah, they do.
All right. Were there any pivotal moments or projects in your career that sparked your commitment to life-centered design, other than the documentary that you watched?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of years ago, so this is honestly a work in progress for me. I'm learning about life-centered design, recently. It's not, so this has been something I've been getting educated on for a couple of years now. But it started from an internal conversation from our company, and his name is Chip DeGrace. He's I think his title is like the director of design. I don't know. He has a new title every year. But he really challenged us to think of our company, and we're a manufacturing company, right? We manufacture materials, but to think of us as a design company, right? And so that we are really no different than a lot of the customers we're calling on, these architects and designers, because we are designing solutions, right? We can't solve any of these problems in the world without a design plan. So we are all designers in our core, and ultimately designers, that's where the leadership is. So design is leadership. And it was this kind of, he really exposed us to some design philosophies and some of the amazing intelligence of Bruce Mao, who's a graphic designer from Canada. And he had, I believe it's called 24 Principles for Massive Change, something like that. Bruce Mao 24C, I think is his book. And it was just, it just, everything clicked. It was one of those things where it realized that we're not going to just magically get out of the situation we're in. And I have been devoted to making sure that I leave this place better than I left, than I found it. And so all of this, it just clicked. And it was one of these things where I was like, this is a message that everyone should be talking about. This is something where, it sometimes feels like a, holistic and like a little bit like, oh, how do you actually define this? And how do you actually how do you tell someone to work this into a project? Because it feels like it's, very kind of airy and stuff. And it is to an extent, but that's part of the point, is that we have to get those conversations going. We have to get our minds thinking. We have to invite new people to the table to start having these conversations, collaborating together, and really trying to push ourselves to think outside the box from what we've been doing. Because what we've been doing, really, we need to make some improvements, right? It's we need to do better every day. Try and do a little bit better than we did before.
I've always heard this said, and I'll butcher this too, that we're very slow to change, but when we do, we can adapt and change very quickly. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this green movement, this global warming movement, and everything else is humanity finally saying, like, all right, we got to do something. We're gonna hit the wall here, and this is our moment that we do succeed. And I do see society responding to it. There'll always be the naysayers, like, they're just trying to manipulate us. Don't believe them. I don't buy that. I know how much corporations will pollute and everything else, and how individually I'll be driven to say, like, geez, these are my dollars. I worked so hard for them. I can't pay like 3 times more for that. I'm going to go for the cheap thing from Walmart that was made in the who knows what. And I know I have my own propensities towards that. And by knowing that and recognizing that even in yourself, to respond to it and say, all right, I need to steer away from that. I need to, and interestingly, the more secure you can make someone, the easier it is for them to make that choice. But if their back's against the wall and they're having a hard time feeding their kids, they don't give two poops about it. And so there's also that intrinsic complexity that has to be dealt with long term, but that's a different conversation. Okay. What steps can architects and designers take to create a climate fit for life, reverse global warming? Create a climate fit for life.
That's a line that we have, that we say a lot at Interface, making a climate fit for life.
As in, like, we're kind of working out the climate to get it in better health.
Well, right, that you're trying to make Earth, better for all life, right? So what can we do? And again, it's educating yourself, educating your customers, your clients, and making sure that we're making choices on materials that are the healthiest and most sustainable options, durable and so forth. Putting in a product that's going to last 50 years is probably a better, design, or more, is, probably a better choice than something that's going to, wear itself out in 5 years.
Can you do that with a carpet tile, though?
Well, it depends on where it's going. So, it's all about making sure you have the right materials and the right applications, so we have to work together. It takes all of us. No one can be a expert in every single element. And so architects and designers need to lean on the entire industry and that level of expertise that exists, and each other, right? So that's one thing I feel sometimes that we miss. We often, firms or competitors, they don't necessarily always come together to share best practices. I wish that was something we did more. We encourage that as much as we can. And so, I've done a few kind of field days, if you will, where we've taken all kinds of customers from all over and brought them together and really kind of gave them a day where you're not competing against, going for the same project. You're not competing for, that same award.
You're taking them out of that situation of worrying about their survival.
Yeah, and getting them to think about it as a team, right?
yeah.
So can we start to think of each other as a collective team that works together and can share and learn and teach? That's critical. And if we're not ever going to get better if we don't stop to take a second and learn from your neighbor and find out what's going on. And Maine's poised, we're kind of natural at learning from our neighbors.
We are the most forwarded state in the union.
Yeah. So, I think about that a lot. I think about, my family in Aroostook, right? My grandmother living on a farm and, just that was just their way of life. And, so can we carry that on, through the rest of our generations? There's a lot to learn from that.
Aroostook's up in in the
It's
very
the top.
northeast, way
It's
up,
like the
way
whole,
up.
the county.
I've only been up to Holton. I
Oh, well,
haven't
you've
been
been pretty
further
far.
north. And
Yeah.
I wanted to go up there with my wife and kids. They went up there camping with like a church group thing that they attend. And I wanted to go to that, but I had some work and couldn't make it. But I always love going up that way because you can watch the trees get a little shorter
Yeah.
the further north you go,
Yeah.
and that it's just that different feeling. It's always interesting to me.
When I was growing up, I mean, that's where my family was mostly. So I had grandparents in Bangor, and then I had the rest of my family was, for the most part, in Mars Hill and Presque Isle. And so that's where every vacation from Virginia was to Bangor and then Presque Isle. And that was Maine. That was everything. I didn't have my first lobster until I was 17, unless you count McDonald's, which I don't think we do. But, and it was beautiful and it was Maine, and that's what it was to me. And now, since my husband and I have moved back here, we are exploring, obviously we live in Portland, so we're in this area, but, going to Lubeck and seeing some of these other spaces, and I'm like, oh my God, the variety that's in Maine is just phenomenal.
I just, the other day, it's so weird to me. I use a drone all the time for work, but I wake up around 4 to 5 every morning, just can't go to back to sleep. So I was sitting there by the fire the other morning, and I had my drone inside. It's usually in the work van, but I kind of looked at it, and I noticed it was starting to get a little brighter. And I had seen a friend who was able to get out on the Prouts Neck area and shoot back towards the mainland and compress it against like Mount Washington. And it makes it look like everything's together almost, And so I took my drone and just put it 400 feet up, and you can zoom in pretty far with it. And it's amazing to see the expanse of, you can put Biddeford right up against the Western Mountains. And then you start to notice the Western Mountains. And we spend a fair amount of time now, and more so in the mountain region, like riding trail bikes and stuff. And it's just such a pretty breath of fresh air, different kind of, there's way less tourists. We appreciate all you tourists. You give us money. It's great. But it's just so much nature, so much fresh air, so much different environment, so much peace and quiet and just beauty and then you get over into these occasional, even over in the Western area, like in these farming areas, that I love the farming areas because all of a sudden there's less trees and you can see for a distance. And it's just like, holy cow, this place is beautiful.
Yeah. If you drive from Holton and you start going towards Presque Isle, yeah, you're surrounded on both sides by like potato fields and stuff.
That would be, I'd have to go up there because I think Iowa, my family, I had some family there, and as a kid we'd go through those areas occasionally, and I just remember seeing endless amounts of fields as you drive around, and it's not a feeling of a place that I want to be, but I love the different experience, and I love to visit places like that are not tourist destinations, but are authentic and real. And you can feel the connection of the people and the consistency of them to a degree. It's just such a interesting, and I don't know. There's something reassuring about it. I don't know what it is.
It's
But
worth going. It's
yeah.
worth going up there, and
Hopefully I can go next year when they go
there's
up there
so much
again.
to
But
explore, and if you like the outdoors, then
yeah,
that's a great place to be.
let's see. How do you measure the success of a life-centered design approach?
How do you measure it? Well, I mean, we could, I think it's going to be, there's different, so life-centered design gets broken down into kind of different principles. So, and there's, some of the principles. One is designing beyond timelines, right? So that's one way right there is
Kind of a 7 generations thinking in a way.
Yeah. So can we start to build in solutions that are going to exceed, the next multiple generations forward? And I think a lot of what we have to do to start figuring some of that out is looking back at the past and understanding, what was done well and what wasn't done well, and how can we learn from that and then take that into the future. Designing in collaboration is another one of the principles that kind of falls under life-centered design. And so that goes back to that, are we starting to work together? And if we're starting to work together and we're combining our tools and we're combining our brain power and the knowledge, then we're going to be able to do so much more and further that, those advances, whether it's technology or building construction or materials. We have to do that in collaboration. So there's not like one great single metric or anything like that. But those are, exploring, going further into life-centered design. And we've just kind of touched on it in, just the beginning. And, that's kind of a way that we can do it is using those principles to help us guide and seeing where those principles overlap too. Back to that kind of idea of a Venn diagram, where can we find the commonality between those principles and those ideas and those, lenses of things, and where, if we can get further into that overlap, then we're doing good.
Right. Now, having returned to your homeland of your ancestors, Maine, where does Maine stand in terms of sustainability in the architecture and design world, in your opinion?
Yeah. So, I think that because we are relatively small from, a population standpoint and stuff, we're not one of those, big design communities, and that we have the ability to be flexible and agile and change more quickly. Now, that also comes with the fact that, sometimes Maine is also known as being a little stubborn, right? We are consistent, and
It's New England. We're a little traditional.
Yeah. I had some of those in my family, for sure. But, I think all of that together we can learn. So the thing I hope is, we're the oldest state in the nation. We have an
what? Really?
Yeah, the collective age of Maine is the oldest out of all the states.
Really?
So
like originally we were part of Massachusetts.
So no, like the average age of
people
living
I see what you're saying. I was
Maine.
like, wait, what?
No. Yeah. So the average age, we are the oldest, right?
Right.
And I think like Vermont and New Hampshire are right behind us.
Yep.
And so we are about to have a situation where we're going to
be given the reins.
Yeah, we are losing some workforce, and we're going to be getting hopefully new workforce, right? So for a while our population has been shrinking because of that aging, and we don't have enough young coming in and kind of beginning a new life here. But you should come here. It's
amazing to see how many people are just moving to Biddeford and in the last 5-10 years.
Yeah.
There's a significant population specifically from Brooklyn, New York for some reason.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't blame them. It's phenomenal here, and there's so much.
It's a great spot.
And the amount of makers and crafts and people who appreciate that. That's one of the things that I hope Maine will always continue. Again, I go back to my family and my grandmother and, the farm that she was raised on in Aroostook. And, they were humble and they didn't have a lot and they didn't waste a single thing. And these are attributes that I contribute to Maine.
Yeah.
And, so going forward, I hope that we are constantly looking at what we have and not necessarily what we can replace and what we can get rid of, but what can we build on?
Where you can pull that idea from just in such a pure manner is the island life that people live. We did a shoot for Dwell out there on around a sea sauna that these guys made who are from LA, but they spend a significant amount of time out on, I think, Islesboro every year. And to hear them talk about how they don't throw anything away on the island because it's too expensive to just get it from the mainland to there. So you end up with all these parts that get creatively reused.
Yep.
And it works. And your mind is more engaged, your body's more engaged in the actual making, your creative spirit is engaged, your Yankee ingenuity and thriftiness is engaged.
Yeah.
Maine could just lead the way in this.
I mean, no, you're not kidding, because I always joke, my grandmother was the best environmentalist I never knew I knew,
Right.
And, she, like the things that she taught me that I've, are just second nature now. Like, I haven't bought a Ziploc bag in I don't know how many years because they just, somehow people they come in, whether it's like through takeout or whatever, and we wash them.
Yeah.
And I guess I said this like, oh, doesn't everybody do this? Like, my grandmother would have killed me if I threw out a Ziploc bag when I was little.
Right.
Like, it would have been, I would have been.
It's a resealable bag.
Like, yeah. And, these are just things, the little things. And I
Yeah.
still, she's been gone for a while, but I still smile and think about those little nuances of what she instilled in me. And, the rest of my family too, like they just, there was value everywhere.
Yeah.
And you know what? There's still so much of their belongings that I have that are in my family, that are going to continue in our household because they cherished, they valued it. They took care of it. And
the interesting thing there is that we probably won't have that much to pass on because all of our stuff is so disposable because we get it for so cheap because our technology is so advanced. That I don't like that thought.
No.
That's weird.
So if we, the fact that we are going back to the fact that we are a small state and we are potentially going to have a whole new workforce starting to, come up from the bottom, is we have the opportunity to make things the way we want to. And I hope that we continue to do it that Maine way, where it's, made humbly, it's made to last, it's made, for multiple generations. It's made from the resources that are renewable and that are here for us to work. The value of the craftsman, here, the value of the artist. It's amazing how much, art is here in Maine, and everything. It can be, we can shop locally. We can do things locally. We can look at the lumber here. There's so much to learn and do here. So, we have a special place, and I think, again, we are on the forefront of some of the things because we are smaller, so we don't have to go through, we're not like California.
We don't have to convince so many people to do
passing
something.
legislation can take years and years and years, and not that that's not a complicated thing, but it is a little bit simpler when you have a smaller, smaller state and population, and when people just know when things make sense, right? It's a no-brainer. And
I wonder, it's not that the people like your family from Aroostook were better people than us, but the situation demanded that they live in that manner.
Yeah.
And that manner, because of the scarcity of resources, demanded that they be, Yankee ingenuity, which naturally is a more sustainable way. So it's more immediate, it's more do-it-yourself, it's more independent to a large degree. And that's the complicated thing now that we deal with so much technology. I'm starting to sound like the Unabomber, but it's like this double-edged sword where technology allows us to get supposedly more of our life back, but then we just spend it trying to get more things. And then we throw those things away, and we don't even have the time with our children back. We don't have the time with our parents back. And all we're left with is our grandparents' stuff that was worth something because there was memories and personality attached to it. And now we're this throwaway generation. And that's a sad thought. But maybe that's what we need to recognize to, start to much more deeply start to value and spend more on fewer things. Yep. In some sense.
Absolutely.
So, that's a depressing thought. I'm good at those. Okay, what advice would you give to designers looking to incorporate life-centered principles into their work?
Just start small. Start with what you can bite off first. It doesn't have to be an earth-shattering, whole. You don't have to go do this, kind of apply these principles throughout your entire life, every project, everything. Just start. Just one little thing. Start, thinking beyond, asking some new questions. Maybe get a viewpoint from someone you may not have considered before, and take a moment. There's there's lots of resources out there. This is a new and it's evolving, and it's gonna be, I'm sure, there's gonna be a lot of discussions in the upcoming years about this, and so take it in and then do what you can. Start and then continue to kind of talk to your coworkers and your friends and your family, because this is something that everybody can apply in their life, whether or not they're a designer or not. We all have the ability to think beyond ourselves and to start to think about all life.
Right. I had a younger woman on the podcast a while ago, but I remember the conversation got around to the clothes that she was wearing and the clothes that she bought were all fairly expensive, but they were of no-name variety. They were locally, beautifully designed and everything else, but locally sourced, locally made, locally designed, the whole thing. And I remember kind of being hit by that of oh, whoa, you're choosing to have fewer outfits, fewer variety with higher value, higher meaning. And I have found when I start to have fewer things that are clearer, more ideologically aligned with the life that I want to live, the life that I want to transfer onto my kids, the better every moment of my life feels, because I'm surrounded by the things that align with what I truly believe and is a harder thing to do. And I push through that difficulty because of the value of it. And there's something within that thought process, I think, that would contribute to designers sharing that with. And so I think if you're a designer talking to someone and there's a way to convey those things, and she didn't come across as preachy or anything else, it's just somehow the conversation got around to that, and it was inspiring. There was no sense of shaming or guilt or anything attached to it. It was oh, wow, that's really... And she was not of some incredible means by any stretch. She was living very modestly, but she spent her money exactly where, and to be fair, I haven't really considered it since then. So shame on me, but...
Yeah, it's something I take into every single purchase I make. You mentioned our money, right?
Yeah,
our
their
purchasing
votes.
power.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what you can do if
Think
you
of them as ballots rather than dollars.
Yeah, if you start to make, think about every single dollar and, what we're passing down to our children. And so very similar to that, I made a commitment a couple of years ago to try and not buy anything new, especially clothing related. And it was a little challenging, but now I I don't even know how to go back to that previous.
How do you do that?
A lot of secondhand.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of there's.
It's such a
consignment
creative
and-
way to go and find stuff that, you'll end up looking a little funky, but that's fun to me,
Yeah, I mean, but you can find things that are new with tags. I mean, you go
Yeah,
into places and it's amazing what people just decide isn't, that they didn't want, or they just had it cleaned out their closet, or
Yeah.
whether it's an estate sale, for your home or whatever it is. And, and now it's, making sure that my kids know that, like, when they need something, because
Right.
they are growing at ridiculous rates. And
Oof.
I just, realized last night, as the weather is down to, whatever, that I need to get my son a new winter coat. And
Yeah.
we'll go to the consignment store first.
That's a
and-
great idea. I was going to go to Target again because the last coat that I got my son, we got for like $30 at Target, and it was a really good coat. But yeah, I'm genuinely supporting probably irresponsibly sourced, irresponsibly made, probably on the back of someone, that would, they in their situation, they might appreciate having the job. I don't know, but I know how dirty corporations are. Why not buy something secondhand that's perfectly fine? And maybe even if you could find something older, it probably is going to be even better.
Oh,
honestly.
yeah. If you can find true vintage.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I have family members that go to some place up north in Wyndham or something where it's kind of like everything that the secondhand stores didn't sell, they'd like put in the center of this place, and people descend and
Oh, yeah. I
and
know
they're
what you're
getting like
talking about.
architects type, like big money type stuff. And I had a friend I was FaceTiming, and like someone walked through and they're like, oh, that's some serious money. I was like, they got that for like $2. It's like, huh, that's interesting. Why am I not doing this? Yeah.
It can become addictive once you like start to realize how
Right.
many like secondhand things there are. And we have some really awesome shops here. Like for every, whether it's kids, adults, home, there's a lot of good treasure.
I love like making your own stuff and like rearranging, taking existing and putting together in a different manner. To me is always just more fun than like off the shelf. Fine, here we go. Let's move on. Last question. If you could inspire one change in the design industry to make it more life-centered, what would it be?
Collaboration. We need to be talking more. We need to be working together more.
It's a very fitting comment at this time of the 4-year cycle.
Yeah.
Collaboration.
Yeah.
All right. And thank you for coming down to Biddeford and helping to educate me on this and kind of remind me as to why things like this are so valuable.
Yeah.
Just in your personal choices and how you vote, not just with actual ballots, but the things that the government has given us to cast actual votes with that mean something are dollars.
Yep. Absolutely.
So
well, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. And where can people find out more about you online or wherever else?
Oh, I don't have much of an online presence, but interface.com, and you can go there. And if my contact information, if you are looking for a local rep, you can find my name there. And then there's lots of fun information. There's more information about life-centered design on our website, and the back, story of kind of what I was referencing. The corporation you can stream that for free on YouTube, I believe.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
That is a documentary.
Okay.
I recommend. Yeah.
All right. The corporation.
The corporation.
I
It's
feel
like
like I've
20
seen it,
years,
but-
over 20 years old now, but it's still absolutely worth taking a look at.
The documentary I remember from architecture school was Koyaanisqatsi. Have you seen that?
No, what was
it? I even heard that recently Native American is not the best term because it's referencing American Vespucciano or whatever his name is. But anyways, it's a native from North. Anyways, it's a name from a native community, a word that means life out of balance. And it's a very interesting documentary where you start to see the man-made flow of things, like the flow of traffic in a city, like the flow of blood cells in a system, and how it reflects on how our lives have gotten this kind of out of balance aspect to it.
Yeah.
That was very influential for me at the time to pick one documentary that I remember seeing in school to reference. So,
Yeah.
Koyaanisqatsi and the Corporation. Watch them both tonight.
There
So.
you go. Homework.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.